It's a call from all young people in South Africa today. The official number released in the first quarter of 2021. Now, youth between the ages of 15 to 34 who are unemployed, sitting at 46.3%. Jobs for young people often feature high when it's time for elections. Political talk, but statistics paint a different picture. Statistics South Africa's quarterly labor force survey released in August shows that nearly two-thirds of those aged 15 to 24 are unemployed, while about 43% of those aged 25 to 34 are without a job. Government has had a youth development focused policy in place for over a decade now, but has it been effective in its purpose, or does it simply remain a pipe dream? Tonight, we delve into this conversation with Youth Development Chief Director at the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, and Dr. Bernice Hlagala with us there, as well as a member of the EFF Central Command team, Sharon Letlape, also joining the conversation. ActionSA Joburg Media Manager and member of the Youth Advisory Council, Sabelo, Chalufu, as well as IFP Youth Brigade National Secretary and MMC for Housing in the city of Johannesburg, Mlungisi Mabasa. We'll also have youth activists and the youngest member of the legislation, Gauteng, Fasiha, Hassan. You're a part of this conversation tonight by sending us your questions and your comments on 072-110-5584 or tweet us at Newzroom 405. Has government been successful in rolling out its economic policies that have got to do with the youth in particular? That's the question we are asking tonight. Sabelo, good to have you with us in the studio, and good evening to you all joining us via the online platform this evening. All right, hope they can hear me there wherever they are. Let's start right there with that question tonight for you, Sharon. Has the South African government been successful in rolling out its youth economic policies?
Thank you very much, and good evening to the viewers. I think it will be very disingenuous for us to say that the government has really played a part on youth. The youth of South Africa has been very forgotten in terms of issues that affect young people, in terms of unemployment, in terms of the well-being of young people, in terms of transformation for young people, and inclusive. Nothing has been inclusive of young people in this country, and I don't think the government really has taken a straw or has taken interest in terms of investing a lot into young people and into developing young people in this country. And that is why we find ourselves with undirected young people, unemployed young people, uneducated young people. Young people are sitting at home and they are hopeless.
Do you know, though, Sharon, that there's been a national youth policy since, I suppose, 2009, there was one, and in 2015 there was another one. Even now there was one that was meant to be launched in 2020, but because of COVID, of course, and policy processes, that became a little bit delayed. But there is one in place. Are you aware of that particular youth policy and its pillars, and what it's supposed to do?
You see, that is the problem, that this policy has been there, and time in, time out, it gets revisited, it gets reviewed, it's taken back to us again. But really, I don't think nothing really happens. There is lack of willingness from the government to implement the government to finally put young people in. As much as they put all these nice things into the policies, nothing happens. Even the process of implementation there's no interest in doing it. The government of South Africa has no interest, and there's no willingness of the government for young people to be included and for this policy to finally be implemented, so that there is development and there is progress in terms of transforming and developing young people in this country.
All right, we'll get into
So we are aware of the policy, but the implementation and the process of it is not there. There is no willingness to put pressure into implementing these policies and to finally make sure that young people are secured in this country.
We'll get into those details of the implementation and what the youth development policy says, integrating youth into the mainstream of the policy programs as well as budgets in the country. Have we been successful in doing that, Sabelo?
We have not. And firstly, greetings to yourself, the viewers, and my fellow panelists. And yes, I want to underscore, we have not. You said it yourself in the introduction. My sister Sharon just said it right now. The nub of the issue is we can sit here, the five of us, and we can waffle on for the rest of the hour. The fact is that young people don't eat our waffling. And even the policy itself, young people don't eat that. Young people eat the fruits of the implementation of the policy. And the fact is that there's just been barely any of that. You can start with 2009, go to 2015, and even the people who are involved in the review in the latest update, some of them have said themselves that it's essentially been a copy and paste exercise from the previous policy, which will suggest to you several things. One, there's a lack of imagination on the part of government, number one. Number two, there's also a tacit acceptance of the fact that government itself has not been implementing the policy, be it the National Youth Policy or all the other policies that government has. The National Youth Policy on its own doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a spectrum of other policies that government must implement, be it education, be it healthcare, be it business and economic development, all of those things. And on all of those fronts, government has failed, and has failed even from whether government wants to use the defense of the economic recession in the late early noughties, or in the most recent incident now of the COVID pandemic. At all times, government will always give us some or other excuse for why it has not been able to deliver, for why it has not delivered. But ultimately, this must be put at the failure of the implementation must be put at the foot of government and the governing party itself.
Dr. Bernice, I've started with those who say it doesn't work, because I wanted to turn around and come back to you, because you, of course, would have the real view of what has been implemented in this policy up until this point. But what is striking for me is when I read even the review, the 2020-2030 youth policy, you're still saying the goal is to build and enhance the capabilities of young people, right? Implying that there's still a lack of those capabilities. But not only that, you're saying the objective is to integrate youth development in the mainstream policies, programs, and national budget. 30 years on, it's still not. What is the failure? Why are we still talking 30 years on that, no, we still need to integrate youth into our main policies and into the national budget? Are you taking this seriously? Dr. Bernice?
Thanks, and good evening to the viewers, and good evening to the panelists as well. We are the first as government to actually acknowledge that when it comes to implementation of youth development in South Africa, we are really falling short. And, there is actually a need to ensure that we scale up the interventions for young people. The first issue that I would actually want to emphasize on the question which you just asked is the issue of mainstreaming youth development in the country. The issue of mainstreaming youth development is not the responsibility of government only. As you are aware that when we talk about the National Youth Policy, we are not talking about the policy for government, but then it is a policy for all role players, including private sector, as well as civil society sector and parastatals, as well as development partners. So we are saying that there is a need for every role player to actually come on board and make sure that we scale up our intervention in addressing the needs of our people. So it is very important that we shouldn't only point fingers at government, but then we must also look at all role players that they have got a role to play when it comes to developing young people.
Yeah. Let's look at the 5 priorities then of this youth policy plan. 1, education skills, as well as second chances, economic participation and transformation, health and well-being, social cohesion, as well as effective and responsive youth development machinery. When we come back, we'll unpack those in those particular categories and find out exactly what is the progress against those priorities that has been made. You've got questions for us tonight, 072-110-5584. You can tweet us at Newzroom 405. We'll continue in a moment. Welcome back. Thanks for staying on with us tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. And the conversation on the development of youth is ongoing. We have, of course, a panel with us tonight unpacking some of the basic principles of youth development and what needs to be done and what hasn't been done. Fasiha, let me bring you in here before we unpack, of course, the various priorities. First and foremost, if you look at the basic principles of youth development the world over, and we take into recognition the world's best practice, right? One of the things that would go with youth development is they are given the opportunity to formulate the solutions themselves. Not only that, they are not just given opportunity to be included in decision making, but they are given the opportunity to take ownership, the leadership of those particular programs and those processes. We have a Ministry of Youth, Women and People with Disabilities in South Africa that is not led by a young person. Why? I mean, that's the first basic principle that we should have adhered to.
Thanks.
So look, the first thing is we know it's the ministry. I'm not sure, was that for me?
That's for you.
Okay, all right. It's a ministry not just of young people, it's also of women, people living with disabilities, so it's all encompassing of different marginalized groups. But we agree that we need more young leadership, more young people at the helm, but we mustn't fall into this trap of thinking that only young people can represent youth issues. I think that's the first thing, right? Otherwise, we're going to fall into this trap of thinking it's only about numbers, it's only about quotas, when in reality, we know the substance of the issue is very, very important. And I think that's where we need to sort of push the direction towards. Regardless of who the minister is or becomes, the reality is we need a policy that is very much responsive to young people, but like you said, a policy that can be owned and empowered by young people. And I think that's really where we need to be focusing on, because we can no longer have checkbox exercises of, wow, okay, we've spoken to these young people, right, we think we've got this under control, when in reality, the situation on the ground is extremely dire for young people. And I think that's really where we need to be focusing. And I think, as Sharon spoke about it earlier as well, that we need to move from a policy position to actual implementation on the ground. So for me as a young activist, as a young public representative, that's the most important thing. How do we translate this policy into actual, meaningful, tangible programs that benefit the majority of young people in our country, beyond just urban areas, beyond just those who have access to politicians or those who have access to political spaces. So that's really where I think the focus of the discussion ought to be.
I want to take it there in a moment, but I want to just park there a little bit and talk about exactly that. We've been doing this for 10 years. The Development Bank of South Africa says one of the issues that are lacking in our youth empowerment is poor participation in programs. The poor participation could rather mean either young people don't know about the programs, or young people can't access the programs because we're not giving them the tools or the infrastructure to be able to access those programs. But the other thing is, of course, are we communicating in the language that young people understand when it comes to these programs? Dr. Bernice?
Yes, we are certainly communicating in the language which young people, understand. For an example, when we were busy consulting on the National Youth Policy, because we understand that young people are also in the social media, we actually, utilize social media space in order to engage young people. And then, we also had, webinars, which is where you actually find young people. So it is very important that we need to actually reach to young people and make sure that we use the different modes in which they do. And then the other thing is that we have centrally involved young people in the formulation of the policy. For an example, we consulted with youth-led as well as youth-serving organizations, so that young people can actually have a voice and clearly articulate what their needs and aspirations are.
Sabelo doesn't agree. Sabelo, why are you laughing? Young people have been given, if you read the policy, there's a youth task team that they consulted, there are youth formations that they consulted into coming up with this draft that is currently...
Which youth formations?
With youth formations, Dr. Bernice, let me not answer for you.
Thanks. We consulted with a variety of youth formations. We went to all 9 provinces. We also consulted with youth formations such as Youth Capital, such as South African Youth Council, numerous such as Activate. So there are actually numerous youth formations that we consulted.
Yeah, they gave you 3. They gave you 3.
If you go into the background of some of these that she lists, they are ANC aligned, or their leaders are ANC aligned. Okay? So what I mean to suggest by that is that this year, not too long ago, just this year, we launched a campaign as ActionSA. As the young people of ActionSA, we launched a campaign saying that there's an agency called the NYDA. It's supposed to benefit all young people in the country, right? And our focus, our point was that it has not been doing that. It has been used as a vehicle, as a graduate school of corruption for the ANC Youth League, and people are aligned to it, right? And we said in our demands, in our memorandum of demands, that I personally handed over to the DG of the department that Dr. Bernice works at. One of the demands there was that not only must the agency be dissolved, and you might agree with us or disagree with us, that's not the point. The point is we sought to engage the department and other youth structures on the modalities that of an agency or an entity that would benefit all young people of South Africa. And we said in one of our demands, I think it was maybe number 4 or number 5, we said that the minister ought to call a summit or a forum of some sort that will include all young people in politics, young people outside of politics, in business and the like. To this day, I can tell you now, to this day, what we received, in fact, upon my handing over of that to the DG, was a chief director of, I think it was communications, who committed to engaging us further in how we, us as young people of ActionSA, can be involved in these very processes that Dr. Bernice speaks of. It is the 26th of September now. We handed that memorandum to them on the 30th of May. Not on it was give or take a day from May Day, right? To this day, there's been 0 communication from them to us. Not even so much as to acknowledge that, you know what, we received your thing, except for the signature of the DG at the day, on the day, there's been no further communication. So to the extent that Dr. Bernice says that we engage young people, yes, you do engage young people, but you engage young people who are favorable to your cause. Right. And it's unfortunate what the minister and the ministry of the department does to officials, that it always pushes them to the forefront. Even on that day, they were not there to account for themselves. Even here tonight, they are not here to account for themselves.
Here the young people are saying they've tried to engage your office, but they don't get access to the office and get that satisfactory engagement with the department.
Our offices, our ministry, and as well as the department, they are actually, it is very accessible to young people and all young people. And it is actually incorrect to suggest that we only engage with the ANC-aligned organizations, because all the organizations that I have mentioned, they are actually non-partisan. They are not even aligned to the mandating party.
Did you involve the EFF Student Brigade? Sharon, were you part of the National Youth Policy formulation?
Not, definitely not. And as a representative of young people in the different communities, young people don't know about this policy. They don't know about these consultative meetings. And when you say you consult with young people, you don't consult with a group, an organized group of young people, because those who are really affected don't fall under any organization. They don't know any organization that speaks on their behalf. They don't know that there's a department of government that goes into deep rurals of communities to go and engage and consult with them on what is it that they really want. So I think Dr. Bernice is really just trying to cover herself, and for a government official to come and want to speak as if she's an opposition is really disingenuous. The government must acknowledge the fact that they are failing young people, and that this policy that they keep producing year in, year out, years in, years out, is really not being implemented. And that's what they need to acknowledge first, so that they see if indeed there is going to be progress in terms of development and in terms of integrating young people into this economy and seeing that there is going to be development for young people. And currently, there's nothing like that. When they say they are consulting with young people, they are consulting, like the latter speaker said, they're consulting with organized groups that also favors them.
Yeah.
But the reality is that young people don't know about this department. They don't even know the role of the department. They don't know this policy. They don't know if really it includes themselves or if it includes a certain type or a certain group of people, academia or whatever the case may be. But the mostly affected young people that we are speaking about here have no idea of what is happening. They don't know what is happening in the department. They know absolutely nothing about this policy and what it entails.
We're going to unpack this policy in a moment. But Fasiha, I want to bring you in here because in one conversation I heard you saying that you actually acknowledge that there are some things that need to be fixed at the NYDA. In fact, you're saying as the youth, there are some suggestions that you've put forward to the NYDA in how they're going to engage with young people going forward. Just come in there.
Look, first thing that we all have to acknowledge is that there is a huge problem with youth development in the country. I think all of us are aware of it, and I don't think anybody's running away from that issue. But I think part of the difficulty in any sort of policy position or the creation of policy is that you need a multi-pronged approach. And I think that's where we also need to be looking at it. So yes, we do need to be engaging with different youth structures across party lines, across the different organizations. That must happen. We can't exclude any young voices. But we also know that youth are not homogenous, right? We know that young people are often not always involved in these spaces. So that's why we do need a sort of multi-pronged approach. But does that mean that we throw away a policy that can be very useful to young people? I don't think that should be the case. But let's deal with the NYDA, because I think it's a very, very important body that can do extremely good things for young people. And I think we've also seen a very good turn of events. We know in the past there were some issues with the NYDA shortlisting. That process went back to Parliament. It was a very transparent process this time around. We've seen some incredible young people from across the spectrum, even from my colleagues from different political parties who have come through. And I think it also breathes some amount of hope that we can see other young people who are going to be entering into the space, who are going to be able to really challenge the status quo, but also come to the party about fixing it. And I think that's the big thing here, right? We can't only rely on one element or one grouping to fix such a big structural crisis. It is going to take government, yes, but it's also going to take labor. It's also going to take the private sector. It's also going to take political parties. It's going to take civil society. And so what we need to do, like the youth policy speaks to, is find a way in which all of us can connect. And all of us can say, well, are you able to do this? Dr. Bernice is able to do this, Sharon's able to do that. How do we utilize the things that we're all good at and the spaces in which we move to ultimately ensure that youth development is at the foremost element? But I don't think it's where we need to be. But I am sort of taking encouragement from the fact that there are many, many, many young people who are not apathetic, who actually want a better life, who want to change things. And I'm really hoping that this policy, even in its formulation and moving forward, can be that opportunity to do it. And I think the NYDA is a very, very important body moving forward for that actual implementation.
Yeah. Well, I suppose strengthening effective, responsive youth development machinery is one part of it, and strengthening the NYDA is one part of the priorities. But I want to go back, talk about the education, talk about the economic participation. Those are some of the pillars of this policy and what we have achieved there. By the way, we did reach out to the NYDA to have them part of this conversation. We have not heard from them up until this point, but I'm sure they'll get an opportunity to do so. Dr. Bernice, Hlagala, Sharon, Letlape, Sabelo, Chalufu, as well as Fasiha, Hassan with us tonight. We'll take your views as well. 072-110-5584. We may continue in a moment. Welcome back. Tonight on In Focus, the development of youth under the spotlight and the policy that has been in place for years, and whether or not it's been successful in unlocking opportunities for young people. That's what the focus is tonight. Dr. Bernice, Hlagala, Sharon, Letlape, Sabelo, Chalufu, as well as Fasiha, Hassan with us tonight. Dr. Bernice, let's then talk about what some of the achievements are. I mean, priority number one is to pretty much improve access to quality education. That is the focus, which you believe will unlock the potential of young people and building their capabilities. Some milestones there have been achieved. The pass rate is sitting at 81.3%. You're saying that is a good thing. 52% of 24-year-olds are now having a grade 12 in the country. What has that really brought for the development of young people in real terms?
Yeah, in terms, we have seen the enrollment rates have actually more than doubled, and that is actually, progress when it comes to development of young people. It shows that school still matters. Hence, when you actually look at the unemployment rate, the more young people are educated, the more they stand a chance of being, employed. So, it means that if young people are skilled and they have quality education, they are likely to actually become employed. And the other issue which is very critical is, early childhood development, because we cannot talk about, high school, whereas, young people at a very early age, they are not developed. So early childhood development is also very critical for young people. The other issue when it comes to education is the whole issue of vocational education skills training. That is very, very important. For an example, currently we have got, shortage of artisans in the country because of young people lacking vocational skills. So there is a need to ensure that as many young people actually are educated, with vocational skills. Yeah. And to that end, we are encouraging that young people should not only look at, going to universities, but they must also target, becoming, going to TVET colleges so that they can gain as much vocational skills.
But wouldn't you say it's the wrong thing to pat yourself on the back for? Because essentially what you have done, you have increased enrollments and you have increased the number of unemployed graduates.
No, we can't say that we must actually pet. Remember that the issue of unemployment is actually structural. And then when we talk about, unemployment rate, is because the economy is not able to create the job at the rate at which there is actually a demand. So we cannot say that if young people are educated, it is actually a futile exercise. That is why we are even exploring other innovative ways in which we can make sure that employment is created. For an example, we are talking about supporting young entrepreneurs so that young people should not only look for employment, but then they must also be able to create employment for themselves as well as for others. We are also talking about supporting small, medium, and micro enterprises. Yeah. So, these are ways in which we are saying that there is actually a need to ensure that, we create as much as different pathways to ensure that.
So you are admitting that what I'm essentially saying, that your education thrust has not matched up your economic reform and transformation thrust. So yes, you're putting a whole lot of them through school and they're becoming graduates, but the economy is not growing at the pace that would be able to absorb them. Not only that, you are not empowering enough youth enterprises for them to be able to create their own businesses and absorb those people who need to be employed.
If we were not actually agreeing with you, we would not be having all this as policy proposals within the National Youth Policy. The fact that young people and even us as policymakers, we have actually made those proposals is because we look at what is working and what can actually be improved going forward. Of course, we agree that there are shortfalls in the education system. Hence, the current National Youth Policy talks about the issue of quality education.
Do you have belief in the national education system? Is it working?
I mean, the education system is one core component, yes.
Hold on, Dr. Bernice, I'm going to come back to you.
Thanks. Look, the education system is one core component of this whole, smorgasbord of pillars to the policy and, just government work and the work of society. But the fact is, you're quite correct. The government is creating a pipeline of unemployment. Yes, young people are increasingly, there's an increase in numbers of young people who are going from high school into tertiary, be it in universities or TVETs and the like. Yes, that is so. But then what? What becomes of them once they have graduated? We had not too long ago a march of young graduates in their gowns going to the union buildings because we are unemployed. We are unemployed, we are underemployed, and then when we are employed, we are underpaid. And then government wants to give us a 350 rands grant for that. I mean, what can you do with 350 rands? Then they say the Department of Social Development will give you an anecdote of some unknown Ayanda somewhere who started a business with that 350 rand. And I mean, that may be so. Someone might, in fact, yes, go and buy a few bottles of water and sell them at 1 rand's, markup on that. But what becomes of the 12 million or so unemployed people in the country? The fact is that there is a schizophrenia that exists between that revolving door that is government and the governing ANC party. When the economy isn't growing, the ANC blames government for not delivering. When we sit with government officials and government functionaries and we ask them why is the economy not growing, they will then blame other forces, other extraterrestrial forces, as though they are not there in charge of ensuring that there's synthesis between the different legs of this whole enterprise.
But do you accept the fact that government, private sector, civil society, all these should be working together to make the policy a success?
Indeed, they should. But government cannot abdicate its role to private sector. You cannot simply tell me that young people are unemployed or underemployed, and then you want to then jump to saying, no, the private sector must create must build the schools or what have you. Government must play its part. Government must play its part, and government must lead.
Come in there.
So I don't think anyone's saying government must abdicate their role. I think the point that's being made is that we need to work as a collective, because the reality is it's such a structural issue that we're not going to solve it as one element of society alone. The other thing that I think we're also not looking at is that we can't not develop young people in terms of skills on the argument that there may not be jobs. These need to be working parallel at the moment and then find itself a way so that it can go towards the actual creation of jobs. I think you did, but I'm not going to get into the semantics of it. So the reality is that while we are in the process of, I allowed you to speak, you're going to allow me as well. While we're in the process of developing young people, giving them an education, we also have to be creating jobs. And it's at different levels, right? So the kind of job that we need to be creating for a graduate is different to somebody who's exiting, and nobody should be, but some people do exit school at grade 9. What are we doing about our TVETs? So these are not things or conversations that need to happen in silos. In fact, I think that's been the biggest problem up to now. Youth development is happening in silos. So different governmental departments have different programs, and they're good programs, but they're not speaking to each other. And this is where I think the National Youth Policy plays a very big role around how do we link those programs together? How do we ensure that we're having a number of different pinpricks in the same sort of fabric, but in the same centering angle, so that we ensure we have maximum impact and benefit? I don't think anybody's running away from that, but I do think it's important that we understand that we all have a role to play in it, including young people like ourselves who are on the call, who are actually watching at home. It's not something where any of us are going to be able to abdicate our duties at all.
Sharon, do we have an adequate education system?
Don't have. I'm saying that because when you speak about education, it's a very broad conversation that we must come in, and it brings a whole lot of aspects into it. So you start with ECDs. Yes, we do need, there is a high need of ECDs in the different communities, but it goes to primary schools, it goes to secondary schools, it goes to high schools, but it also comes with the quality of education that these learners are actually receiving. Is it the quality of education that will be able to give them access into universities, into institutions of higher learning, or into TVETs? And we have these two institutions where then it separates who's better than who. It also separates the quality of education that you get in your different communities, which is another problem. Now, you have a group of learners who go to TVETs. There is no infrastructure in TVETs. There's practicals there. They don't have infrastructure for practicals. They don't have the means of actually doing their work and finally finishing off and putting their education into the quality that it needs. So then they become unemployable graduates, which is what they were talking about. So we have unemployed graduates, and this is also because there is no relationship between the workspace and the school. So there's no relationship between the workspace, between the high schools, and between the institutions of higher learning. So you find a learner or you find a student finish matric, they go to varsity or they go to TVET, they finish, they get a qualification, and they are still expected to get experience out of that. So, and that is what the latter speaker was speaking about, that then you find yourself with a flood of unemployed youth. And what do we do about that? And we do acknowledge the fact that there has to be different parties that form part of this process of youth development. But the government needs to also reach out. It has to be the government that puts or that calls the political parties together and say, we need or we have a plan. There's a policy that needs to be implemented. And we think that as political parties, with the influence that you have and with the constituency that you have, this is what you can do to meet us halfway. I mean, the EFF was launching its manifesto today, and it spoke about a whole lot of aspects. It speaks about the EFF municipalities on youth. It speaks about how the EFF wants to develop skills for young people, how the EFF wants to ultimately develop young people in the different communities. And this is a political party that wants to assist or that wants to put effort into developing young people. But there is no government. There's no willingness. There's no willingness from the government. There's no political willingness from the government to reach out to political parties. And like Hassan said, they want to work and operate in silos, which is not going to work. But that cannot stop us from holding the government accountable. It is the responsibility of the government to make sure that these policies are ultimately implemented. And if they are not able to work with other political parties, or if they don't come up with creative ways or integrative ways to make sure that the policy is finally implemented and that the constituency that is affected finally gets delivered and finally gets progress in terms of development, then it's a problem. Then it means we're going to continuously have these conversations and nothing is going to come out of it, because a political party like the EFF is going to have its own program, and with the lack of resources, with the lack of administration, as an opposition party, they are not able to do as much as the government can do. So if we are to call each other like this and say that we need to work together, the government needs to make initiative. And there is no initiative from the government. They want to work in silos, and that is why we will always have to separate them from political parties and from the work that has to be done.
All right.
There's no way that you are going to take a learner from high school, take them to institutions. There's no access in institutions, by the way. There's financial exclusion in institutions, and this is also because most of our communities and most of our learners that come from matric and go to universities, they don't have funds. So there has to be, it's a bigger program to say, how do you move a matriculant to an institution of higher learning, and how do you finally make sure that you secure access for this particular learner? And after that, how do you secure a job? And a job is not just to work in the private sector. We need to come up with creative ways. How do you develop skills? How do you make sure that the private companies or the private corporates come in and put in what the government policies are speaking about? How do
all right, Sharon, I got to take it back. We'll come back and we'll touch a little bit more on that economic participation and transformation and what you're talking about as far as provincial and local government. Fasiha, I'll be interested to hear how province is actually dealing with the situation of youth participation. Dr. Bernice, Hlagala, Sharon, Letlape, Sabelo, Chalufu, as well as Fasiha Hassan with us tonight. And we've got a list of your WhatsApp messages, which I hope to get through in the next segment. Do stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus tonight on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Do we have a national youth policy that works? That's a question that we're asking tonight. We tackled education moments ago. Let's look at economic transformation and economic participation. But first, though, a list of your WhatsApp messages tonight and what you think of this conversation so far. Honest from Cape Town say, I think government is doing much better. South Africa is here because of the vandalism of infrastructure. Simpiwe Moyigwa from PE saying, I don't think they take it seriously. In my view, government should convert other schools into vocational high schools so that while they learn, students also earn, because jobs improve our livelihoods. Tapo in Kempton Park says there's no visibility on government projects encompassing youth empowerment. Both the private and public sector should form a stronger partnership in youth self-sustainable projects. Ntabi saying the government is not serious about youth unemployment. A lot needs to be done by government. A robust and aggressive policy that allows youth participation in economic activities should be deliberately activated by government. And that's what I want to talk about. A national youth economic empowerment strategy, Fasiha, that is already in place and should be implemented, dictates that you need to encourage provincial and local government to formulate youth economic empowerment strategies. In other words, increase, for example, the value and the number of youth-owned enterprises in province as well as in local government. How are you dealing with that in province? How many youth enterprises would you say province is taking up and supporting?
Thanks, Thabo, for that question, and it's hugely pertinent. I think one of the difficulties has been that disconnect between local, provincial, and national policy and position in that way. I'll speak to Gauteng in particular because that's, of course, where I'm a member of the provincial legislature. We have different interventions, one of which is the TEPA 1 million program. In fact, as the portfolio committee, I sit in the oversight of the Premier, under which this particular program falls under. And we're undergoing quite a scrutiny, we scrutinize the entire policy, but also the program. And it's going under a complete review because we felt that the first 2-3 years of the program was successful, but now we're seeing a plateau. And I think that's what we need to be very aware of, right? That we need responsive policy that we can see in the first 2 to 3 years, okay, we're seeing a positive benefit, but right now we're not seeing it where it needs to be. And that's why we're undergoing this complete review. But one of the other big things that's happening, particularly in Gauteng, are the schools of specialization, which is also very important around that skills development. I think one of the WhatsApp messages spoke to it. And it's really around giving young people those skills, but linking them quite formally, not just into these temporary sort of internships, but we're partnering, for example, with the BMW. So the schools of specialization that are particular to automotive, how do we ensure that that skill then ensures they get a job and a proper sort of link between what they're learning and an actual opportunity? But let me speak to the entrepreneurship because that's been a big one, right? We want young people not just to be job seekers, but to be job creators. And one of the things we're about to implement is the Gauteng Township Economy Bill. And that's a complete bill that's focusing very much, actually only, on entrepreneurship elements that we can provide not just financial assistance, but also non-financial. How do we assist a young person who started a business to take it from this level to another one? When we see young people selling fruits and vegetables on the side of the street, how do we take their businesses to the next level? So I think we have a number of different tools in our arsenal. But of course, it's one in which we do need to be a bit more flexible. It's one in which we need more young people in the space. But it's also one in which we need to constantly, at every quarter, which is what we've started to do, actually assess whether it's an impactful program.
That's where I wanted to come in. Monitoring, evaluating, and reporting on this and whether or not it's working. Who is held responsible for that?
So on a Gauteng level, it depends on the different program under which department it falls under. But as the legislature, we've taken a very strong stance on the issue and ensuring, like I said, every quarter, we're not just asking for reports on that level. The reality is we meet with these departments every week. So the GCRA program, which is a big one, being the Department of Education, Basic Education. Every week we're having different meetings with them to try and ensure that there's implementation. So, but you need monitoring and evaluation both externally, so that's, of course, by the civil society, but you also need monitoring and evaluation within departments themselves. So before they even get to the legislature, before it even gets to the portfolio committee, you need a daily process of accountability. And I think that's where we need to be building our structures up as well. But I do think that we're having the right systems, and I think that we're already starting to see some of the big benefits of those interventions that we've put in place, at least in the legislature on that level.
Dr. Bernice, there are people on WhatsApp saying we need a stronger policy that will ensure that there is equal and inclusive growth in the economy, particularly when we're saying inclusive, that includes young people.
Yes, I think our national youth policy is actually strong enough. But then what we need to do now is to ensure that we track implementation of the national youth policy. And to do that, the department is currently developing the M&E framework, where we are going to be tracking, the national youth policy if different role players are actually implementing the policy proposals that have been stipulated. So that is one issue. And then the other issue is that the National Youth Development Agency is also developing the integrated youth development strategy where clear targets with timelines are actually set in terms of what has to be attained on the national youth policy. So we are on track.
Right there on the targets and timelines, right? This is a National Youth Policy 2030. I don't know if you heard what young people are saying. They want jobs today, not in 2030. We don't have a policy that responds to them getting jobs today.
Yes, if we are talking about the M&E framework, it means that we will be tracking, we will be setting the indicators to say that how many young people, for an example, ought to be employed within the agricultural sector, within the manufacturing sector. So we are not waiting for 2030 to track implementation of the National Youth Policy, but then we are actually starting now to track the implementation.
School of Specialization, SEPO 1 million, some of the programs that are currently aimed at economic transformation?
Look, I heard you ask for a number of young people and young businesses that have been supported by these programs, and I didn't hear a response that gives a number. But that's beside the point. The point for me is that once more, I keep hearing from, Dr. Bernice and from Fasiha, that it's, again, more talk, more we will meet, more, talk. No action. The fact is that young people, like you say, are hungry now. Asking us to wait until 2030. I mean, frankly, in 2030, I will be what? In my late 30s and the like. All of us here who are the young people in this panel will also be in the same situation. But the young people who are in school now, what becomes of them at that point? The fact is the implementation needs to be happening now, and the solutions are, in fact, present now. Government has to cut red tape. During COVID, not as though it has ended, but during the initial lockdown, there was a flurry of new, documentation that business owners had to, complete before they could, in fact, operate. Not even to earn, an actual living out of what they do. These are the kinds of things that stifle growth. These are the kinds of things that when government officials then speak about a structural unemployment problem or a structural economic problem, government itself becomes the bottleneck against all the development that needs to take place. We need to be cutting all of that kind of stuff. Our ActionSA manifesto speaks to the fact that we need to be increasing access to one-stop shops for business owners. We need to be cutting red tape, like I say. Government officials and their politician friends are very quick to expedite processes when they have a very clear line to eating from the fat of the country. When they were authorizing the emergency procurement of PPE and the like in the Gauteng province itself as well, they were very quick to process all of those payments into the hundreds of millions, but tell them to pay small business owners who provide and supply government with bottled water, who provide and supply government with tissue and toilet paper that the government officials use in the offices. They will take months. So where they cannot see that, they do not implement that. And that is why even we have a dearth of young leadership across the spectrum. The NYDA that we spoke about not too long ago, it has been without a board since early or mid 2019-18. To this day, the process that went into appointing the new board, it was completed in July. 3 months later, the president hasn't signed off yet.
Taken back and forth.
I mean, come on, guys.
Completely
come on, implement.
That's where we're going to have to leave it for today. Point is, there is a national youth policy which focuses on education, skills and second chances, economic participation and transformation, health and well-being, social cohesion, and effective and responsive youth development machinery. But is it working? Is it being implemented? And how are we going to monitor and certainly make sure that it does what it says it will do? That is, of course, what we'll keep on doing here on this show and asking those questions. Thank you very much to Dr. Bernice Hlagala, Sharon, Letlape, Sabelo, Chalufu, as well as Fasiha, Hassan, and thank you for your engagement tonight.